Thank you. So, yes, when I wrote my abstract, it was slightly different. When a fellow, so this is a quote when Hugh was writing to his brother at one point, and he says, yes, when a fellow gets on a bit, he begins to see things in his own individual way. And so we're looking at a few of his ways here, and I couldn't resist this little etching block of glass is in the National Gallery of Australia's collection, and it's just like all the illustrations in his letters and things, and I just thought it was just a lovely thing to have a look at. So I'm going to look at actually some of his early works, even before he went to the NGV School of Painting, and look at some of the influences and aspects of his technique. So it's sort of perhaps a brief overview. So, Boy's Own Adventures, and he was so full of life and enthusiasm for so many things, and so this is quite an early picture that he did in watercolour, the Gunpowder Plot or the Rye House Plot, and I just thought it was useful to see that because the next work that I'm going to speak about is this gladiator, and you can see it's got quite a disrupted surface, but it's in rather a well-made gilded frame, and it was very curious on doing some conservation on it. When it was taken from the frame, the paint had adhered to parts of the frame, so this was framed while it was still wet. And I've often wondered, but it's pure speculation, whether when he was selling works to gather money to go to Paris, that perhaps this may have been a work for that purpose, because it is framed so nicely and while it was wet. But as you can see, there's this disrupted surface, and so I was doing conservation on it, and I was just terribly curious, and had the opportunity to take this and a couple of other paintings to the Royal Melbourne Hospital and have x-rays taken. And with this one, the problem with the x-ray for this one is the composition underneath was completely painted over in lead white, which of course to x-rays is practically impenetrable. The thing though was, there were images, see how you've got these men on the horses in the Stanley Berkeley picture, with sabers and, riding. It was something sort of like that. But the interesting thing was, as well, at the back of the canvas, painted over in lead white, was this inscription, saved, the incident of or at somewhere, reproduced in colour by Hugh Ramsay from pen and ink drawing by Stanley Berkeley. And so, so it's just another example of artists reusing canvases, but it's sort of a nice evocation of his playfulness in his younger years. And yet another example here, Paris Rooftops, which is now in the collection here, had there were sort of waves, slight waves in the canvas itself and surface structure. And this one, on being x-rayed, you can, is this I don't know. There's the head of what appears to be an African man. So we've got the x-ray on one side and then the image there. You can see in the top of the figure's head that there's the dark squares for the windows and some of the white passage in that building that's sort of in the middle of the composition. But then there are other brushstrokes and things that are sort of difficult to attribute to something. I have seen some of his paintings where there are actually 3 compositions. So that's just an interesting observation, I guess. But so prior to joining the NGV painting school, he did this work. So it appears that this may be one of his first or very early attempts at oil painting. And while it doesn't have the sophistication and nor the tonality of his later works, for somebody just having a go at oil painting, it's really quite clever. There's quite a lot of underdrawing in the painting, and one of the things that was quite interesting to see is he went into quite a lot of detail in his drawing. So this curve here is actually the curve of the carafe and just a segment of the flute. So just this little passage just here. So you can see that he's put in the either bone or ivory, the lines to set that up. He was going to have one of the blowholes here, and these darker circles are where it's actually painted on the surface. And then over here, at the end of the flute, you can actually see he's drawn in the key, which is actually further up the flute. So he's always thinking and working. You can just see that he's working out the process, making changes as he goes. But also here, I guess overall with the painting, it's evoking the bodegones paintings where you have, a flagon of wine, things to drink. We've got some of the symbolism of the vanitas as well. And, one wonders, could this be him working towards the painting that, that one, to get into the National Gallery, one needed to have a painting to use. And so I'm thinking that maybe this is him working towards that at this point, because this is 1893 when this was painted, and I think it was maybe late 1894 when he joins the school. And because he was just so active in his work, he's always inventing, he's drawing, he's writing letters, cramming things in, and inventing things. And here, just about here, again in infrared, is this what appeared to be a maker's mark. I've looked to see wooden flutes. Many of them are made of boxwood, like this one, and in fact, this painting is in the Ian Potter Museum of Art's collection at the university, and a flute that he played, because he was equally excellent in music as he was in painting, and the flute that he had played has actually been attached to the frame, which is a lovely legacy to have. But yes, no flute makers appear to have actually used this. I was thinking it was something sort of like a ship. But if anyone has seen any image like this, I'd be very interested to see where he's riffing from. And then also at the Ian Potter Museum of Art at Melbourne Uni, a collection of artist manuals that Hugh Ramsay had, and in almost every one of him, he's somewhere or other put his name in it. And Patricia gave these to the university a number of years ago, and this is the thing that I thought was really interesting. So they're dated. Most of them are actually publications prior to the time that he entered the gallery school, but he may well have used them while he was preparing for it and at school. And he made an incredible number of edits to the directions, and which show his choice of paints. And so here is an example. And so this is from the booklet on marine painting in oil colors. And as you can see, so at the beginning, he's listed all of the colors that he's used. And then when he's made a change from, say, cobalt to permanent blue, he goes through from page to page to page. So in some of them, it's throughout the whole manual where he's made his changes. Looking at, let's see, do I have it here? Looking at this next page, so this is at the back of one of the booklets, and so there many of them are Winsor and Newton catalogues at the back, and he's ticked, and so, sorry, it's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see where he's ticked which colours he's wanted, and some he's written up lists of all the paintings and painting boxes and things that he, perhaps was his wish list. And on reflection, some of the changes, I think perhaps maybe it was the expense of the actual colours. Because here in this section we have paintings that are 4 shillings for a tube, whereas the price goes up as you go, and most of the paints that he's chosen are actually in this area. Cobalt is much more expensive than permanent blue. So perhaps that was an impulse for him. He often wrote in his letters about the expense of framing works for exhibitions, or just needing to gather funds to pay for his materials. So he had economies on his mind as well. And so he gets to the NGV school. So we have a photo here of Bernard Hall, and some of the key issues in the teaching were drawing with good outline, anatomy and therefore form, tone, colour, and design. And of course they were in what is now just the State Library building, as well as the museum being there. And so a picture that we've seen a few times today. So charcoal underdrawing, rather than, say, pencil, seemed to be the norm, at least during that time. And whilst it's a little bit difficult to see, there's a perfect right angle here. He's just plumbed this line incredibly well. You can also see where he's sort of working out parts of the anatomical form here, and some lines there where you can see he's been working out where the positioning of the legs for this nude study. And this is just absolutely lovely. So again, another picture that we've seen a number of times today, and the flesh tones are beautifully done, but I'll talk about those a little bit later. But here you can see the drawing. You can see where he sort of made some changes in the area of the lips. But one thing to note too is you can see there's sort of two eyes. So it would seem that he has actually painted the eyes and then painted them again just a little bit higher. So again, sort of thinking about how it's worked at the end and going back in to make some alterations and changes. So I thought it would be interesting just to look a little bit at some of the influences, seeing as we are looking at the legacy of Hugh Ramsay, and so, but a legacy, to have a legacy, you often have benefited by the legacy of others. And in the mid to late 19th century, the works of Frans Hals really came into recognition. He'd, for quite some time, his reputation had been completely destroyed because I think he had spent quite a fair bit of time at the pub, and his children had to bring him home and things like that. And so, but his name was brought back, and he became quite popular in the 19th century. And whilst it may not be very easy to see here, across the cheeks there's quite a lot of hatching, sort of setting up the colours in the skin tones. When Van Gogh saw his work, he was completely blown away and sort of immediately took to it. So whereas with John Peter Russell, it was colour that influenced Van Gogh, it was hulls and that hatching. And you know, when the next time you look at some particular works of Van Gogh's, you know, it just sticks out at you. And so here we have two examples of works by Bernard Hall. So we've got a detail of despair, and you can see here on the side of the model this hatching that's developing form. And in this dear old Dutch woman, her face is made up with, you know, quite thick, broad hatching as well. Now, the thing that was interesting was Bernard Hall, he studied in Antwerp, he studied in London, and he also studied in Munich. And William Merritt Chase also studied in Munich, and there was possibly a little bit of overlap. Merritt Chase was there prior to, before Hall had been. But in looking at his work, I could see that there's strong evidence of this sort of hatching as well. And Patricia speaks about this hatching in the works of students in the book on Hugh Ramsay. And it just seems that it's interesting that so many people are doing this all at the same time. Obviously, say when working with pastels, it's a typical thing to do, or drawing, but it's, yeah. And so here we can see a cross in the feet and other parts of the flesh tones. You can see just a cross on the edge there of Jessie's dress. And here in Meyer Altson's, this image isn't quite so fabulous there, but you can see some of it too right there on the arm. One of the manuals that Hugh Ramsay had was on portraiture. And in looking at portraiture, they talk about the various days that you work up your paint, your composition, and starting from the darks and leading to the lights, working in glazes with flesh tones. And this head study of a girl, which is in the Ian Potter Museum of Art, seemed to be an interesting example of perhaps something that was sort of slightly unfinished, where he was developing the incredible surface effects that he has in his flesh tones. So here it seems kind of rough and raw, but I think it's a really interesting thing to look at in terms of seeing his process and how he's moving and experimenting and changing and developing his methods. And here, his expressionist sort of brushwork that really, so this is done after he's been in Paris, and you can see there's a much more expressive, quick brushwork that he uses, and I just thought it was quite interesting on seeing the Mrs. Hunter painting and how the highlights in their hair was developed. And here in this detail of a picture of Jessie, it's quite obvious as well that he's very selective and a little bit abstracted. And shortly I'll show you an image that makes the development of this picture of Jessie. So this is a detail of Jessie with doll. But I thought it was really interesting just to see here, you can see, like that boy, the painting of the boy on the box, you can see that there's something underneath her eyes, which is probably a reworking of the eyes at a later point. But you can also see that there's just this marvelous expressive brushwork, very loose, as Michael was speaking about in some of his paintings. And here is part of an X-ray of that very painting, and you can see with the eyes, he's really done quite a lot of reworking. And in a letter to his brother, he wrote about how frustrated he was with this painting. He kept on trying and trying and trying, and that was one of the things that is so amazing about his artwork, is that he just kept persisting. You know, if he didn't get it, he'd just keep going. One thing, so with this X-ray, you can see that there are these sort of staples here and some short nails and longer nails. At some point, the canvas had been on its stretcher and had actually been extended, and in some cases you can sort of see where a little bit above the head, that's sort of originally where the canvas finished, but it does actually sort of squash the image down. And so here, this is an infrared image, which I think just gives you a little bit more detail too, where he's working out some of the lines with graphite and charcoal to develop the eyes. And here, sort of last but not least, here is Jessie with doll and an ultraviolet light image of the painting. And I just think that this expresses incredibly well his selective use of varnishes and you know, his brushwork to develop the image that and effect. And so here it actually seems as though he may have painted in some hair and then just there, you know, just dropped in, you know, some flesh tones to sort of even things out. You may notice that in parts the pink of the dress and to some extent in the dress, but say particularly with her lips, there's sort of an orangey, pinky red glow, which is associated with alizarin crimson madder that all have certain components that fluoresce in a particular fashion. So you can see, so the greenish tinge is from natural resin that would have been painted over, and so in doing several days of painting, you know, working up the composition one day and coming back, there could be layers of varnish between those different days, but also we're getting a lot of other things going on so that he can create the effect of the highlights here and the darker areas in the shadows of his work. So it's just a very brief overview.